Thanks for joining us on Relational Practice, a social work podcast. I'm Dr. Jodie Park.
I'm Rose Mackey, and we're both private practice social workers here in New South Wales, Australia. Today we're recording on Darul country. We both work in the fields of child and family.
You're like mixing it up, aren't you? All right.
Welcome to this episode.
Yeah. Thank you for listening and for continuing to listen. We would love for you to subscribe, rate and review our podcast and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram and via our YouTube page. We will be adding content and videos.
I forgot that I had the outline. Sorry.
You forgot your...
I could read it myself.
Oh, you can read it yourself. Okay. Yeah, we will be adding content regularly as we can.
Regularly. Please send us any practice stories, questions, comments, concerns, episode topics that you'd like us to talk about.
Or if you want to talk with us.
Yep, to relationalpractice01@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can use our social media, direct message us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. What are we going to talk about today?
Oh, we're going to talk about boundaries.
I love it.
Do you?
I do, because I think it's so important.
I think boundaries are very important. I used to think that boundaries were about keeping people out.
Yeah.
And I think that what I've learnt over the last couple of years is that boundaries aren't actually about building fortresses and keeping people out. It's about containing ourselves, managing ourselves. It's about safety for us, but also safety for our clients. And I think I didn't understand that very well for a very long time.
Can I tell you that I actually, when you said this plan to me and I read that, I was like, wow, that's actually so true. Because I've always thought that boundaries are around personal containment.
Yeah.
So, but I hadn't actually thought, I probably still thought more about it in terms of this fence around yourself. But it's about what you do with yourself inside the fence.
Yes.
So I was kind of like, well, this is going to be a great topic.
I think, I hope it's going to be a great topic. I think boundaries are absolutely the analogy that we're going to talk about today is a fence. But I think what makes me hesitant about talking about boundaries is I do not believe any one person can teach another person how to put boundaries in place or what the boundaries should be. I think boundaries are so dependent on who you are, your role, the role description or core components of your role, the legal obligations and the ethical obligations of the role you're in, the client population you're working with, that all are dependent, right, on your boundaries. But you as a human are the only one that can build your fence and make your fence. And so when I think about boundaries, I think it kind of sits in the grey because there's no real this is what the boundary should be. It's not clear. You're not going to finish listening to this episode and be like, right, tomorrow I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, and my boundaries are going to be great. That's not what's going to happen because boundaries are so individual.
I know, but hopefully what does happen is that maybe someone will wake up tomorrow and have a think about what their fence looks like.
That would be amazing.
And why their fence looks like that.
Yes.
And does their fence need to look like this giant, great, big brick wall? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, well, even if it does, it's about working out, well, what does that fence then do for the relationship I'm building with people I work with?
Or do I need a new fence? And fence is the analogy, right, for today's discussion. So I listened to this amazing social worker, Lauren Finemore, talk to victim survivors about boundaries a few months ago. And what she was talking about was boundaries. And the analogy she used, we're stealing.
The fence.
The fence.
Yeah.
So she talked about 3 very particular fences. And so the first fence that we want to talk about is the chicken wire fence. And for those of you that don't know what a chicken wire fence is, it's this very oftentimes short fence with wire with lots of holes. You can absolutely see through it. Oftentimes you could put your foot on a chicken wire fence and it would, fall over.
Yeah, it can crumble.
You can step over it. You can cut through it. It's a very ineffective fence to keep things out or in. But strangely, on lots of properties, we use chicken wire fences, oftentimes to keep chickens in or, just as a boundary. But if you think about your boundaries as fences, a chicken wire fence is not a great boundary to have for the reasons that you can see through it, you can step over it, you can get around it. The other type of fences you can think about boundaries being like is a brick wall fence.
Yes.
And I'm talking a very large, long brick wall fence.
So can I just clarify, we're thinking about boundaries from the practitioner's view?
Yes.
Yep.
From the practitioner's view.
Okay.
So if you think about a brick wall, quite high, you absolutely can't see over it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't scale a brick wall. I could never pass a police officer's fitness test because I can't scale a wall. Couldn't get over it. I can't push my way through it. Can't see around it. It is just large and intrusive, right? It's blocking everything. It's absolutely great fence to keep people safe and contained in. But there's not a lot that can happen, is there? You're in a brick wall fence. You are just kind of on an island by yourself. It's blocking connection. It's blocking empathy. It's blocking relationships.
Is it blocking empathy? Because I was thinking when you were talking about maybe what actually is in that brick wall fence is some cognitive empathy.
How though? Can't get through. How do you get through?
But if you were say a practitioner and you needed these brick wall fences, that doesn't mean that you will then think you're not an empathetic practitioner.
Oh no! And sometimes, when I finish the analogy, maybe it'll make sense. You need a brick wall boundary.
Yeah,
absolutely.
100%.
But you've already taken whatever's happened, the relationship, the connection, the context with you, and built your brick wall. If you start with a brick wall, nothing can get through.
But what if you think that that's the boundary you need because you're bringing yourself to work, so you've got all your stuff in this backpack, so for you the brick wall feels safe, but you still think you're an empathetic practitioner?
Then I would think I need more information and I probably need to supervise you because I've got lots of questions.
Okay.
I think there are times where absolutely you will need as a practitioner a brick wall boundary, but it is not, well, I would think after listening to this episode, maybe we would think it's not the type of boundary we want always as a practitioner because you can't see through them. You can't get over them. You can't get around them. They're very large, very obtrusive, right? Blocking everything out. When you think about a brick wall, think of it that way. You're blocking things out, right? A chicken wire fence, you can see through, you can step through, you can step over, you can dismantle quite easily. Also, probably not effective boundaries to have.
So it sounds like it's quite weak. It sounds like it's breakable.
So breakable. Flimsy. Whereas I heard Lauren Finemore talk about boundaries more like a picket fence. So if you think about a picket fence, you can see through picket fences, you can get your fingers through, you can see over them. Most picket fences actually have a gate. Gates can be closed, gates can be opened, gates can be locked. If you have a picket fence as a boundary, you're in charge of the gate being open, closed or locked. Much better kind of boundary visual to have in mind. Having this picket fence means you can be flexible. That it's not rigid like a brick wall, is it? Because boundaries are never, ever static, rigid or immovable. Well, they shouldn't be. Because how is that we're working with humans?
They should be or they shouldn't be?
They shouldn't be. They need to be flexible.
Right, okay, yeah.
They shouldn't be rigid.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be a brick wall.
Yeah,
all the time.
I misheard you. I think I zoned off for a sec. But I'm back because I was thinking about something you said.
Disassociated. What were you thinking?
No, it wasn't. I was thinking about the brick wall stuff still.
You're stuck on the brick wall?
I was stuck on it, but I'm with you now 100%. Let's keep going.
Why are you with me?
Because I feel like I'm going to have to give the brick wall stuff some more thought. But I should not do that right now because we're in the middle of recording a podcast episode. But I like the visual of the picket fence.
I think you might have a default fence that you go to regularly as a practitioner. Absolutely. I think back to when I first started. And I probably had a chicken wire fence, to be honest, for the first couple of years I started as a practitioner.
I mean, that makes sense, though. I think a lot of people would probably have a chicken wire fence.
Yeah. I remember when I worked in the detention centre, taking boys' clothes home to wash before they went to funerals so they didn't have to smell like the detention centre. I remember sometimes bringing in food for all the boys, and above, like, everyone knew, it wasn't hidden. But I think about that now and I think, wow, your boundaries were so chicken wire, so loose. Overly empathetic, overly emotionally empathetic, I would say, and very loose boundaries. Chicken wire fence. I think over time I was like, not helpful for the client, because once you can't keep doing it, or things change, or center management changes and no longer are you allowed to take the clothes home to wash for there's all these problems that come from in relation to me and the boys.
Yeah. It blurs the relationship.
Blurs it. And, I think as a chicken wire practitioner, I thought I was being helpful, and I was in one particular way, but it wasn't in line with my role. Wasn't in line with the role description I had or the expectation my employer had of me.
It was very much an emotional empathetic, effective empathy response, which we know effective empathy is not good for the client, not good for you.
No. So I think over time, my fence changed. I recall periods of my working life where I absolutely had a brick wall and nothing else but a brick wall. And those were the times where I had, vicarious trauma, burnt out, compassion fatigue, really crap times in my career. And a way I thought of protecting myself was just to have a very big brick wall, impenetrable. That's when you think about a brick wall in this context, think about it being impenetrable.
Yeah. Like a fortress.
A fortress. I'm just keeping myself safe, right?
Yeah.
I'm just hidden, locked away, doing the doing, but in a very contained, safe, like nothing's going to penetrate this wall. No feelings, no emotions, none of that. Whereas over time, I have learned, and when Lauren talked about it in this analogy, that absolutely a picket fence would be the most kind of ideal boundary to have, because you can have a gate, it can be open, it can be shut, and it can be locked. And I own this fence, so I'm in charge of opening the gate, I'm in charge of shutting the gate, and I'm in charge of locking the gate. That's not up to the clients, to my boss, to my colleagues, that's up to me. But you will think about, you might default to a particular fence under stress. So you might want to have a picket fence, that might be the ideal, but under stress you might default to a chicken wire fence. Lose your boundaries or have very loose boundaries. So I guess the question I want to ask you is, what fence do you default to when you're under stress at work? And are there times in your career where you see different fences? Or are you the type of practitioner that's always just had a picket fence?
Are you asking me that question, or is that a reflective question for everybody?
Reflective question for everybody. I wouldn't expect you to answer that.
Thank goodness.
But I think that having that analogy is really helpful if you're a practitioner, to think about your boundaries in that sense, but also to know that our boundaries are not fixed. They actually need to be flexible, hence why the gate open, shut, lock.
Yeah, well, they do need to be flexible. You're right, because you need to be able to respond differently to different people. Yeah.
And you have different roles, you work for different organizations, and this is why boundaries are bit grey, because it depends on so many things as to what kind of boundaries you'll have. But we know that we need boundaries in this work.
But it also depends, it depends on what you take. We go back to the analogy of the backpack. It depends on what's in that backpack.
Absolutely.
Because that is going to influence your boundary all of the time.
Yes. So is your history.
Yeah, because that's
not
in the
just
backpack.
Your current context, but your history. All of it, you're right. It all impacts. So I think have that analogy in your mind as we talk about boundaries.
I love that analogy. I do actually really like the different types of fences as an analogy for boundaries.
Yeah. And none of them are wrong, right? You might be in the type of role where a chicken wire fence is an appropriate boundary to have. But as you change roles, as different clients come into your service, maybe you need to consider, do I need a different fence now?
But I think also you illustrated it really well when you talked about your experience when you worked in juvenile justice. I think the fact that I think maybe one of the considerations about the type of boundary you need to have is what is going to be the consequence of this boundary long term.
And sometimes I don't think you think about that when you're engaging in things like taking home someone's clothes to wash. I never thought long term what's going to happen when the centre manager changes and the next one says, absolutely, you are not doing that. They will have their clothes washed here like every other detainee.
But it's a bit like me, and I've talked about the fact with when I first started in family support, you know, I would go shopping and use my own money. Yeah. Not to do a big shop, obviously, but to buy, you know, like essentials like bread or milk or something that a baby might need.
Yep.
And that was very much a chicken wire fence because it was such a loose boundary.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I never thought at the time, it felt uncomfortable, absolutely, but I never understood why. And I was never actually ever thinking about that in terms of what is this actually going to
mean. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you do what you do with the knowledge you have at the time.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And whatever that saying is, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of these conversations I wished I had in university in the early 2000s when I started around the need for boundaries, what they can look like. And I think part of it is that greenness that no one can say, here are the absolute boundaries for you. Because you have to know yourself, like you said, your context, your history. You have to know yourself. You have to know your job description. You have to know that professional boundaries are not a personal preference either.
Didn't you just say before that they were? I thought you said that you can't tell people what kind of boundary.
Oh, I can't, but the personal and the professional, as a practitioner, like it's not a personal preference to have this boundary because you have legal ethics. You have code of conducts, you have policies and procedures. Oftentimes we work under legislation. So they're not optional. And this is not from your personal, like, oh, I'd like this.
So do yours... So
what did I say before?
I think what I heard before was that you were saying that you can't, that your boundary is up to you. You can't tell people what kind of boundary to have because it depends so much on you.
That's true. And I did say that. What I should have also said was, however, you also need to consider what are your legal obligations, what are your ethical obligations, what is the code of conduct that you've signed, what is your role description demand on you. In that sense, those things are not a personal preference.
No.
There are some professional boundaries that you have no say in.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a real sorry.
Glad you
good point that to make. Yeah.
So here in Australia, if you're part of the Australian Association of Social Work, we have a code of conduct, and that talks about our values: respect for persons, social justice, professional integrity. And our code of conduct here requires us to recommit to those principles, right? My job description sets out very clear parameters for my work hours, how I use my work phone, how I record and store client data. I don't have any personal preference in that. That is very much set, that boundary. What I do have a personal ability to make decisions around is how I engage in people's homes. Things like, will I take their clothes home and wash them and not tell my centre manager or tell my centre manager? So I guess it's a blend of both, but you have to know what is your professional boundaries. What are the very black and white things that your job description, your code of conduct, the legislation sets in place for you legally and ethically.
So, and I think that's the difference. So I think what you're saying is that there is, at any given time, there's an interplay between the almost mandated boundaries that you need to maintain because of the role you're in, the profession you're in. And that is, so there's an interplay between those things and what you bring to the party in terms of the way that you work.
Yes.
And the way that you want to be perceived as a professional.
Should have just said that from the start. Yes.
Well, I think
it's a long way to get there.
No, but I'm glad we got there because that makes sense to me, because there's always going to be tension between those two things.
Always. And I think, especially if you think about Vicki Reynolds' work where she talks about spiritual pain, I wonder, like, that's kind of the stem of that, isn't it? Where if your job demands you to act or do things in a certain way and personally that doesn't sit well with you, that's that spiritual pain, isn't it?
But also, if your job demands that you do this and there's an expectation that you will do this and you have chicken wire boundary, and then so you then overcommit,
Yes.
then you are actually going to be experiencing burnout, and before you know it, because you're not protected in any way. You're not protected by your work. You're not protected by your own view of what the work should be.
I also then wonder what's the interplay then of the client relationship, because you've overcommitted.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Do you do something underhanded or behind, your organization's kind of back and knowledge? Or do you say to your client, oh, I made a terrible mistake. I actually shouldn't have said that. I can do this because I actually can't. What's the fallout then for the client?
But I think the thing is that because the other option is that you follow through with what you committed to do.
Yeah,
but at your own expense.
Oh, well, that too.
Because think about it, it might not be, you might not have said you'll do something that's against policy. What you might be doing instead is actually, doing all this work in your own time so that you never actually get a break. That's a chicken wire boundary as well.
Yeah. Or you're doing something against policy, hoping no one finds out.
Yeah, because
it's coming from a good place and you think, oh, well, they just need $80 worth of groceries and I can absolutely buy that for them.
But that's the tension, isn't it, between the kind of mandated, boundaried expectations of your role versus what you believe your role should be, that professional interpretation of what your role is for you.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be the difference. The difference is how we interpret the role for us.
Yes. And how well, I guess, we understand as well what is not just an ethical obligation for us or a legislated kind of guidance for us, but what is it that our clients need from us for us to actually be ethical practitioners that can provide them with the best service, whatever that is. Because our boundaries aren't just about us. They're also about keeping our clients safe.
100%. Well, that should be the case. But I think that goes back to what you said before around how it is about how you interpret a boundary. Do you interpret a boundary around keeping everyone else out, or is a boundary about containing you?
Yeah.
Or is it a bit of both?
Bit of both, and containing you. And I guess if you think about the ability to open a gate, shut a gate, lock a gate, that's very much, I see that in protecting clients. Because you don't want your gate always open and clients to come in. You think about it, then they get a different caseworker or a different therapist and that gate is firmly locked. What does that feel like for the client?
But I don't know if everyone would see it that way.
How else is
because I think that sometimes boundaries are very much about the professional.
Yeah.
And the professional responsibility and behaviours that you want to portray.
Yep.
I don't think that everybody would then take that next step in terms of that kind of thinking about that and actually think about what is the impact then on the client if I have these boundaries. I don't think people would do that, Rose. I think some people would.
Yeah.
Really reflective practitioners who have great supervision, who are able to think things through, would definitely do that. But I think people, if you are someone and you are just trying to make do in your world and you're trying to actually just get by managing the expectations that are unrealistic, I think boundaries are very much about the professional then.
Yeah. Or if you're brand new in a role.
Yeah, and you're learning.
You're learning.
Right. Yeah.
Brand new.
That's true.
Like I was young, dumb, had no place being in a detention centre. Had no clue. But I think it's those lessons that definitely help you become reflective and think about the client or the next practitioner has to work with his family. If I set this up and I leave, what happens for the next practitioner?
Well, yeah. You would hope people would get to that place where they would actually be thinking in that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know if we can say that everyone will.
My hope is that everyone's having quality supervision and that we talk about boundaries now in the academic world and people are well equipped when they start roles to think about boundaries.
So I think what you're saying, though, really clearly is that we should always be talking about boundaries in terms of the impact on the client.
Absolutely.
So it's that stuff around boundaries, what they mean for you as the practitioner, but it should always go that extra step. thinking about the impact on the client.
Yeah.
And I think that is the power of this episode, because we are not only just talking about it in terms of this professional view, or we're going to take it one step further and always thinking about what is the impact on the client.
Yeah. Yes. Which I think just makes sense, doesn't it?
It makes sense to you, but I don't think it makes sense to everyone. Yes, it does. But it wasn't what I first thought. When we first started this episode, I was thinking purely from that practitioner's view. Which is why I asked you that question. Is this from the practitioner's view?
Well, it is, because the practitioner's view has to incorporate the client.
I know, but what we're talking about is it actually being from both. It's about talking about boundaries in terms of the impact on both.
Yeah, because as a practitioner, you need to think about that.
I know.
So I recently have finished working with a young man who I've worked with for a long time in not a therapeutic role, and I'm handing him over. And I think it's been a really good reflection on me thinking about my boundaries. So in handing over, the new practitioner that's taking on this young person has asked questions like, why did you do that? As in, what's an example?
Why did you drive down at 7 p.m. and
No.
2 hours away?
Not that. More around, why did you answer the phone call after 5 p.m.? Well, private practice, I set my own hours. That client is typically not awake between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. So, and I typically see younger people between 1 and 5 doing after-school activities. I would never, ever be able to answer his phone calls. So for me, that boundary was, on particular days, we had an agreement. You can ring me up until 7 p.m. and I will answer the phone.
Mm.
But it was spoken about.
Yeah.
It was an agreement we had.
It was a clear plan around it.
Very clear plan. I would say that gate was absolutely open.
Yeah.
I would shut it at 7 p.m. and I definitely locked it at 8 p.m. And on days where it wasn't agreed, the gate was locked. I wasn't answering the phone call. But the new practitioner take on the case is like, I absolutely will not be answering my phone after 5. Totally fine. That's your boundary.
That's right. That's your boundary.
But it felt a little judgy, the handover.
Sounds a little
like,
judgy.
Why are you doing this? Like, our boundaries are not all going to look the same.
Yeah.
And what worked for me, it worked for me to answer that phone call on these particular days till 7 o'clock because it meant I got to speak with my client. There were days where I had to, reschedule other kids' after school therapy to go and see this particular client because that's just how it was for a whole range of reasons. He was not awake until 1 p.m. and not really functioning until 5. Absolutely not my preference, but to work with him, I needed some adjustments.
Yeah.
The new person taking over is like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not here to say you have to. I simply said, you need to have this conversation with him and work out how you're best going to communicate and what that's going to look like. What worked for me clearly isn't going to work for you. But I wasn't being unprofessional or unethical.
It sounds like you were actually being responsive. And it actually sounds like you had some really firm boundaries around it.
Yeah. So I was like, these are just my boundaries and you have very different boundaries. Neither are right or wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging their boundaries. I felt a little judged in my boundaries. But sometimes we just need to understand that our picket fences, whilst they all look the same, it's around the conversations we've had with clients and what does work and how do we best meet clients' needs. If I was in a different role and my work hours were purely 9 to 5, absolutely that would have meant something very different. I don't know how I would have serviced that client, to be honest, but I likely wouldn't have had children every afternoon after school to see either.
Yeah.
So it depends on your context, right?
Yeah, it does.
But I do think when I was doing this handover, I was like, because I felt judged. I was like, have I done something wrong here? There's that split second of the tone. There was kind of an accusation. Here's this young man and you've been working with him for years. And I think that sometimes you can have a blurred boundary when you work with clients over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I was like, I did something wrong.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. And then I thought, actually, a handover is a really good time to check in on your boundaries and to see how well have we maintained our fences.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is fences need maintenance.
Yeah.
especially picket fences. They need to be painted. Sometimes they need their palings staked in the ground. The hinges on your gates, they need some oil. Just like our boundaries, just like fences, sorry, our boundaries need maintenance. And having certain check-in points can be really helpful and useful to think, what are my boundaries here and how well is my fence maintained?
I really do like the fence analogy when talking about boundaries. I really do, for so many different reasons. But you're also right, just the way that you explained that. Fences need maintenance. Of course, your boundaries are always going to need maintenance.
Yes.
And, hopefully you're getting some really good supervision, reflective supervision where that is the maintenance.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of definitely the major maintenance pieces that you need to attend to. And I think even just using things like handing over clients, taking new clients in, what is your, kind of agreement with them around communication, and how do your boundaries come into play in that role? And what my boundary looks like versus your boundary will be very different, but that doesn't mean that mine are wrong and yours are right, or vice versa.
Right.
So I think what the research also talks about is boundary crossings and boundary violations, and how do we know the difference?
Yeah, that's a good one.
And I think as a new practitioner, I clearly didn't know the difference of a boundary violation.
But how would you know as a new practitioner? You don't know.
I don't know. I think someone could have taught me. Isn't it just known information? I don't know. But it makes me think about, how do we help new practitioners with their boundaries? How do we have these conversations? How do we talk about boundary violations?
Well, is that even language that's used? Boundary violation. I actually don't think I've ever used that term in my life.
No, but you have talked about it.
Of course, but I've not used that language. But it's probably good language to use, because that's what it is. It is a boundary violation.
Yeah. And I think what I've read lately about boundaries is the test is asking yourself, am I doing this for the client?
Yeah.
Or am I doing this so I can feel validated for me?
I love that. I think that's a reflective test that should be on lots of different scenarios, because it's true. Is this for you or is it
for them? Yeah. And I think, so they talk, an example of a boundary crossing might be a client's graduating high school and you want to attend the graduation. Are you doing that for you, or are you doing that for them? Does it harm the client? Does it exploit the client?
Those are the questions you need to ask yourself.
And there's no answer here, because I don't know your role. I don't know your context. I don't know your obligations, your code of conduct. So that's how it all comes into play. In some instances, I would think attending a client's graduation might absolutely
be the most appropriate
thing.
Yeah.
In other situations, I think it can be an absolute boundary violation.
100%.
And so it's not black and white.
It's definitely not black and white, because it's so contextually driven.
Yeah, the only kind of boundary violation I can think of that would be universal for all of us is maybe having a romantic relationship with the client.
God, and how often does that happen?
That has to be the one example, right? That is a boundary violation for all of us. Would you agree?
Oh my God, yes.
But it does happen.
It does happen. That's what I mean. And it's always shocking. Whenever I hear about it, I'm always shocked. I've always been shocked. I've been, practicing for how many years? Lots of years. And still, I always have the same response, which is absolute shock. Absolute shock.
Yeah, how are we here? How did this happen? But that, to me, is kind of the one example I think of when I think of a boundary violation that's for everyone. It's universal.
That's universal.
Can you think of any others?
I don't know. Maybe going to stain at a client's home?
Well,
why would you?
Why would you if you're not in a romantic relationship with them?
No, but maybe not even a romantic relationship, but maybe developing a friendship.
Outside of work.
Outside of work.
Okay.
That's another boundary violation. It has to be about, because the relationship can never really be ethical in terms of power or knowledge, really.
Yeah.
The amount of stuff that you learn about people, they have no control over that.
What about you finish your work with a client, the file is closed, they are no longer a client of your service, and then you start a friendship?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I think that would have to be something that would be case by case, and you'd need to be really clear in yourself around why it's not a boundary violation.
I think that kind of, in the literature, that's talked about in the complexity of context around culture, power, and rural practice. And I've worked, Jodie's just burst a sensory toy all over.
Oh, yuck. And my pants.
Let me get you this.
Oh, no. It's going to be like I wet myself. There's some wax there.
Was I boring you?
No, I was just playing with it. And I was thinking to myself, stop doing this because it's going to bust. Oh, yuck. It's like white goo. Oh, it's all over the floor. All right, keep going.
So, yeah, I guess that leads to sometimes the literature talks about us having a rigid Western view of boundaries.
Yeah, you're right.
And in some contexts, such as Indigenous and rural communities, connection and shared community spaces are actually cultural values. And sometimes when we have our picket fence gates locked, it can feel very disrespectful. It can make us seem untrustworthy as the practitioners. And I guess that's where you think about cultural humility and how we need to collaborate with clients and communities and understand what works for them.
But I also think, and I think you're going to move on to this and I'm probably jumping ahead, but I think also rural and
absolutely
community, it would be the same.
Yeah.
It would be similar.
I think rural and remote practice, especially in our context in Australia, has been talked about a lot, where dual relationships are very unavoidable. And manage them requires so much transparency and self-awareness and adherence to professional codes of conduct. I've worked in very rural settings and it was so hard. I worked in a child protection system rurally. I lived in a town of 78 people. The closest town had 2,500 people at the time. And I was on call every other week for the entire week. So being on call meant you could still go out after work. But if the phone rang, you had to answer. And there was no other, in kind of the city settings when we worked on call, you had a partner. That's how we met.
Well, we met before that. Being partners was just fun.
That was just the cherry on top.
It was just fun,
But in rural settings, you're alone or often you get teamed with the police officer. And I can remember many times sitting in the pub of the next closest town, being on call, and the people that ring you to say, you've got a job. And I remember once sitting at the pub in this town and the phone rang and I was watching something unfold at the pub and they wanted me to respond at the pub I'd been in for the last hour. And I remember sitting there thinking, how? How is this going to work? Thankfully, the police officer, who was off duty but on call as well, was also in the pub. And we just looked at each other and were like, we've seen this unfold. What was reported also wasn't reported from my narrative very accurately. But I'm like, they're 4 tables over. The whole community's here. You want us to just get up and walk over?
So what'd you do?
We left the pub and went to the police station house and rang back the people that call you out and said, listen, here's the context. We've been in this pub for hours. We weren't drinking. We were both on call, but there was a massive football game that Saturday for our community. It was the, what do you call it? Like the dual rivals had played each other.
Derby?
Yep.
Derby or derby?
Derby. Whatever it is. The whole town was at the football match. The whole town went back to the pub. And the people we were talking to lived in the city. And they were like, I don't care. I remember saying, I don't care. The reports come in. We've triaged it. It needs to be responded to right now. And I was like, I think I said, have you ever lived and worked in a rural remote community? And they scoffed and said, it doesn't matter where you are. The response is the response. And I said, oh, okay. And the police officer, I knew him because we worked that closely together. He's like, I feel like we just have to do it. I was like, I feel like we can't do it. Like, we cannot in front of the whole community now go up to this family and say, everyone had seen it, everyone saw what happened, and everyone knows who we are. But talk about breach of confidentiality. The whole town knows who we are, what we do, and we're going to walk up to their table and say, can we go outside for a chat? I was dead against it. I feel like the police officer was like, let's just get it done. Let's not cause waves because I caused waves. And then my organisation would bring his bosses and they were not as forgiving, I guess, as my direct line managers at the time. I'd got him into trouble a few too many times.
He was like, oh no.
He was just like, let's do it. What ended up happening was something sparked in me and I said, hang on a minute. You said we had to respond immediately. They said yes. I said, is it a level 1? Yes. That meant 24 hours. I said, great. 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. We'll respond tomorrow at 9 o'clock in their house where the whole community doesn't have to see it. The time frame is 24 hours, correct? We will respond within 24 hours, but not now, not in front of the whole community.
That was a great option that you came up with.
It was so hard though. The next morning, we obviously responded at 9 o'clock on a Sunday. And I remember knocking on the door and the father opened the door and he just looked at us and he said, like, are you fucking serious? And I said, no, yes, actually we are serious. And the only thing that helped him de-escalate was us being able to say, we could have done this last night at the pub. We chose to wait until you were at your house. There is no one around. We really need to talk to you about what happened. But it was hard because we'd seen what had happened.
Yeah.
So it is so very more complex when you live and work rurally or remotely, when you're working with Indigenous communities or communities of a different cultural background.
100%.
They aren't the same in every context, our boundaries, and we need to know how to adapt without compromising the protective function and the containment of our boundaries.
Yeah, you're right.
And how we do that will depend, as we've talked about.
Yeah. I think that's a great example you gave. That's a great story. Like it's such a great example of how you had to adapt your boundary to suit the context you were in. Yeah.
I often think about that because I think, what are the chances that you're ever in the same place as something happening? And I chuckle because I remember sitting at the bar with my Coke Zero thinking, how much longer do I have to be here? Because the game was over. You know, everyone, obviously, not everyone, most people were enjoying their drinks and I was on call and I just wanted to make my 35-minute drive back to my little property and go to bed, and the phone rang and I knew instantly, it came up with the name and I knew instantly it would be about what had just happened, and I thought, don't answer it, Rose, don't answer it, like avoid it.
Well, you couldn't because you're on call.
Well, they would have just rung back. But I think, what if we had responded?
Well,
right then and there.
I mean, it would have been a very different outcome in terms of, well, for you, but also for the family, because there would have been so much more emotion attached to the response.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think being directed or managed by people that live and work in a city, sometimes it's really helpful to explain the actual context and the doesn't matter. You know, I could have inflamed that situation by just going back at them, but I was like, hang on, let me tell you, the whole community is here. Like, it's not, you know.
Yeah, that's right. It's not like you're down, you know, it's not like there's like two people.
Yeah.
It's everyone.
And the fact that you're also known in a rural community, if you're the police officer, the child protection officer, whatever your role is, if it's statutory or not very pleasant, it also means that oftentimes my gate needed to be locked a lot more to make myself safe. People knew where I lived.
Yeah.
When I went to do there was no distinction between who I was and what I did.
Yeah.
And that can be really unsafe or uncomfortable at times. And I think we don't often talk and give rural and remote practitioners that kind of light for how much more difficult their jobs can be.
Well, I think when you live and work in the same community, it is always going to be tricky.
Yeah.
It's always going to be tricky.
Yeah.
Whatever your role is, it's always going to be tricky. Because there's always going to be someone who is upset with you, but you're also going to know some very confidential information about other people.
Yeah. Can be very tricky. And I think that is definitely where you need to think about the maintenance to your fence and when your fence or your gates are open and locked.
I love it. I think that's a great example.
Yeah. Do we just want to talk about the cost of when our boundaries break down?
Yes, we do. I think we definitely do.
So the evidence is very clear that where we don't have solid boundaries, and by solid I mean a picket fence boundary, where we can open, shut and lock a gate, the impacts on us as practitioners can be compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. That is one of the quickest ways of exposure to vicarious trauma, having very loose boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Definitely makes sense.
Absolutely. And burnout is the other, fun thing that we can experience when our boundaries are not very
protective.
That's a great word. So in Australia, social workers frequently report that other health professionals lack a clear understanding of boundaries of our social work role, which can impact and confuse our role, which I find really fascinating in the literature, that we as a profession have said other health professionals don't understand.
So do you
the boundaries?
Well, I mean, health. Let's face it, in a health settings, employ more social workers than any other field. So there's a lot of social workers that work for health.
So do you think it's working in that multidisciplinary team? It impacts them more because they're...
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it's also, your work is very much driven by a medical model of expectations. Do you know what I mean? And I think sometimes that would go against this more kind of social justice framework or social advocacy framework.
That actually makes more sense. When I've read this and I'm like, why? How? But that's very clear. Medical model, social justice, and different roles. Yeah.
I mean, I had a very short stint as a hospital social worker.
I do like these stories.
A very short stint. For me, it was not a good fit. And I remember the nurses in particular just did not like social work. Like honestly thought social work was just a waste of time. We're talking 20 odd years ago as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure things have changed now. But just really thought that social work role was about holding somebody's hand and doing the emotion stuff. And really that was kind of all it was. Well, that was my interpretation.
Which, when you think about it in the lens of boundaries, is really interesting, hey? That's the thought for your role.
Well, that was the way that I interpreted it.
But
yeah, other people I'm sure had a very different interpretation. But I felt like, and this was my experience of working on 2 wards as well, so I'm sure different wards it may have felt different.
Yeah.
Well, it did feel different because at the time I actually had 2 jobs. So I had like 4-day-a-week position at doing family support with families where there were drug and alcohol concerns. And then I took this 1-day-a-week job for a short period of time as a hospital social worker because I'd never done it before.
And you wanted to test it out?
I wanted to experience it. And so for me, the job I had 4 days a week, I also worked in the same hospital, but on a different ward and in a very different capacity because I was like a non-government worker going into the health setting. So there were different expectations.
Wow. Talk about walking in 2 different worlds.
Yes. And so the 1-day-a-week position, that was on medical wards. So yeah, I felt like whilst there were exceptions of people that respected the social work role, I think generally speaking, I did not feel respected. It was almost like eye rolls whenever I would raise something from a social work perspective in terms of a patient outcome. Yeah. And I think that definitely contributed to my short stay because I felt like this was not the world for me because I've come from a world where I felt really respected in terms of my professional opinion and the not so much, it's not all about listen to me, but it's about the respect for being able to actually voice an opinion, have that opinion listened to. It doesn't mean that people did what I say. That's not what I'm saying. But it was about people actually, you could contribute to the discussion.
Yeah. Diverse perspectives were heard.
Versus, why are you even speaking? Your job is to hold someone's hand and, do some discharge planning. You just go do your job.
Yeah.
We'll have the big conversations.
Well, that makes much more sense of this literature. It says social workers frequently report that other health professionals lack a clear understanding of the boundaries of the social work role itself, which compounds role confusion and stress.
It would. I think, look, I don't know. And, I don't know what it would be like now. Obviously, I'm talking about my 20-odd year ago experience. But I think it would be a really hard place to work. Some wards or some places in health would be really hard to be the social worker, the lone social worker, trying to have this really strong voice.
Yeah. And then that would impact how boundaried you are.
100%.
What your boundaries look like, what they feel like, absolutely would impact. You might have brick wall fences, you might have it would impact absolutely your boundaries.
And it would definitely cause some vicarious trauma, not so much in terms of the client's stories, but trying to manage the environment.
Yeah, and the professional relationships. It would be exhausting.
It would be absolutely exhausting.
Let us know if you're a social worker in a health setting and if you agree or disagree with that research, or the literature, I should say, around boundaries. I think... I feel like I've rambled a lot in this episode, but I just want to, wrap it up by making sure that we understand that boundaries are not about keeping clients at an arm's length. That actually, they help contain us and they actually help make relationships with clients safe.
Yeah.
Safe for the clients and safe for us. And that the myth that practitioners that don't have boundaries are more compassionate is just that. It is a myth. Without boundaries, we're less sustainable and ultimately less effective for the people that we're working with.
100%. And I think that is, if you take anything away from this, I hope you take that away, because that is absolutely true.
Yeah. And I think depending on what your fence looks like, and hey, it might be a brick wall fence, it might be a chicken wire fence. Who knows? Could be the picket fence. Know that our fences have changed over our careers, and our fences will there'll be times, I'd like to think mine right now is a picket fence, but there will be times where there'll be a particular client or role I'm in where it will become a brick wall. None of it's wrong. It's about knowing and understanding what your boundaries are. It's about being flexible enough to adapt and change to meet clients' needs, but also to keep us safe. We want to keep ourselves safe and we want to do the best we can for our clients, and we want to keep them safe.
Well said, Rose. Love it.
So hopefully this episode has sparked a little bit of reflection or reaffirmed that, hey, you've got an amazing picket fence and you know when to open the gate, shut the gate and lock the gate.
Yeah. Yeah. Good one. I'm glad we did this episode. I'm glad. Lucky, because we just did it. All right. Okay, that brings us to the end of another episode of Relational Practice, a social work podcast. We hope today's discussion was valuable for your practice.
To ensure you're always in the loop, please follow our podcast, follow our social media engagement as well, so we can help build our community and get these conversations around the world a little bit more. Thank you for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Stay safe and remember to always practice relationally.
See you later.
Bye, guys.